It was a sharp winter morning at the Grand Ridge Police Precinct. The kind of day where your breath hangs in the air and tension settles into the walls. Officer Rowan Ketteridge, a man known for his unshakable demeanor and deep voice that could quiet a room, held tightly to the leash of Copper, his K9 partner. Copper, a broad-shouldered German shepherd with eyes like polished amber, had never acted out of line in the 6 years they'd worked together. But now, in the wide-open lobby flooded with glass-filtered sunlight, something was wrong. Copper's hackles were raised, his teeth bared, and his growl low and steady as a child stepped into the room. The girl couldn't have been more than 6. She wore a moss-green parka with a fur-lined hood and clutched a faded purple backpack to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Clara Morrow, one of the precinct's social workers, had been escorting her in. But the moment Copper laid eyes on the girl, something shifted. Not aggression, not confusion. It was as if Copper recognized her. Rowan stiffened, tightening his grip. "Easy, Copper. What the hell's going on with you?" he muttered under his breath. All around them, officers froze mid-step, conversations cut short. The growling filled the space like a warning siren. Clara stepped back instinctively, shielding the girl with her body. "Rowan, what is happening?" she asked, voice tense. The child didn't flinch, didn't cry. She just looked at Copper. Her wide, dark eyes locked with the dog's as though she were waiting for something. Copper didn't lunge. Instead, he slowly lowered his body to the floor and whimpered, a sound none of them had ever heard from him before. It was a sound of longing, of recognition. Rowan's heart pounded. Copper only made that sound once before, 6 years ago, the day they pulled him out of the burned-out farmhouse during the Haverstock case. Gideon Haverstock had vanished that night, taking a young girl with him. Everyone assumed she had died in the fire. Rowan remembered the look on Copper's face when they found the child's stuffed animal in the rubble. Now, as Copper crawled forward on his belly, tail wagging low, Rowan looked back at the girl. Really looked. The curve of her jaw, the tilt of her eyes. Couldn't be, but it was. "Clara," Rowan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Run her name, right now." As Clara pulled out her tablet, Evelyn Branscombe, the precinct's lead forensic analyst, rushed in from the hallway, alerted by the chaos. "What's going on?" she asked. Rowan couldn't answer. All he could do was kneel as Copper reached the girl and gently rested his head against her legs. The girl finally spoke, her voice a quiet echo. "His name is Copper. He used to be mine." And with that single sentence, everything Rowan thought he knew about the case unraveled, because the girl they all believed was dead had just come home. The buzz in the precinct didn't fade. It thickened. Clara Morrow's fingers trembled slightly as she typed the girl's physical description into the state database, her breath catching every time the system hesitated to load. Behind her, Rowan kept a close eye on the child, who now sat on the floor beside Copper, stroking the dog's fur with a kind of quiet reverence. It was an image so out of place it didn't make sense. This little girl, calm as stone, next to a dog who minutes ago looked ready to attack. Clara glanced at Rowan and whispered, "If this is who we think it is, we've been living with a ghost in our records." Meanwhile, Gideon Haverstock's name was already crawling back into Rowan's mind like a shadow you can't shake. That case had buried itself into every crevice of his career. A notorious arsonist and suspect in several disappearances, Gideon vanished the night the farmhouse went up in flames. The girl presumed dead? His niece, Iris Thatchley. She had been missing ever since, no remains, no sightings. Until now. Rowan stared at the child, her curls bouncing as she laughed softly at something Copper did. "She doesn't remember me?" Copper had found her before any of them could. Rowan wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. Silas Renford, the precinct's on-call detective, arrived a few minutes later, adjusting his worn blazer and looking as skeptical as ever. "So what? The dog's got a sixth sense for missing kids now," he muttered. But even Silas couldn't ignore the way the girl responded to Copper. "She knew his name," Rowan snapped back, his voice low and firm, "before anyone told her. That dog was part of the original case. He was assigned to track her scent. He never gave up, not really. Silas frowned, folding his arms. Dogs don't hold on to things for 6 years, Ketteridge. Rowan shot him a look. Tell that to Copper. Maeve Larkspur, the department's child trauma counselor, was already kneeling beside the girl, asking soft questions. Sweetheart, do you remember your name? The girl hesitated, her lips parting as if the word was stuck in her throat. I think it's Iris, she finally said, voice so small Maeve had to lean in. The room went dead silent. Copper licked her hand and whined again. Maeve met Rowan's eyes with something close to disbelief. It's her, she said quietly. It has to be. Rowan's heart sank. There were too many pieces starting to line up, and yet too many still missing. Harlan Devereaux, the chief on duty, stepped into the room, pulling Rowan aside. We need proof, he said gruffly. Blood work, DNA. Until then, she's a Jane Doe, and we keep this in-house. Rowan knew he was right. The media would devour this if word got out too soon. Still, part of him resisted. Copper had recognized her without hesitation. That had to mean something, didn't it? But facts were facts. Emotion wasn't evidence. As Iris was led away gently for a full evaluation, Rowan stood frozen in the middle of the precinct, Copper at his side. The past wasn't just back. It had a name, a face, and tiny hands that gripped the fur of a dog who'd never stopped searching. And in Rowan's gut, one truth echoed louder than the rest. If Iris was alive, then so was Gideon. The cold, gray light of late afternoon settled over the precinct like a blanket of dust. Rowan sat in the briefing room, elbows on the table, fingers locked tight beneath his chin. Before him were the remnants of a case file that had haunted the department for nearly a decade. Photographs of a charred farmhouse, a scorched teddy bear, and the name Iris Thatchley written in faded ink across the top of a missing person report. Across from him, Silas Renford shuffled through the newly printed DNA request forms, tapping his pen in an uneven rhythm. You really think Gideon kept her alive all these years? Silas asked, his voice heavy with doubt. Rowan didn't answer at first. His eyes flicked to the corner of the room, where Copper lay on the floor, unmoving, his head resting on his paws. I don't know what to think, Rowan said finally, but Coppa's never been wrong. Silas huffed, clearly not ready to buy into the idea that a dog's instincts could reopen a closed case. People don't just disappear for 6 years without leaving a trace, Silas added. Rowan turned his eyes back to the file. Unless someone wanted them to. That thought lingered longer than either man liked. In the medical bay, Maeve Larkspur sat beside Iris as a nurse gently swabbed the inside of the girl's cheek. The child had barely spoken since confirming her name, and even that seemed to take a monumental effort. Maeve tried to keep her tone soft and reassuring. Do you remember where you've been, sweetheart? Iris blinked slowly, her small hands tightening around Coppa's leash. She shook her head no, but her eyes said something different, like memories were clawing just beneath the surface, too painful or confusing to speak aloud. Copper hadn't left her side since she arrived, refusing food, water, everything except staying close to her. Meanwhile, Evelyn Branscombe was pulling archived surveillance footage, combing through any trace of Gideon Haverstock in the years since the fire. The man was a ghost. No financial records, no phone data, no traffic tickets. It was as if he died in that blaze. But Evelyn had a hunch. Someone like Gideon didn't just vanish without help. She keyed in a cross-reference of old associates, including known affiliates in 3 nearby counties. A name popped up, Harlan Devereaux. She stared at it, heart skipping. Not a match, but a relative, a cousin. And Harlan had joined the force just months after the fire. Back in the hallway, Rowan was stopped by Clara, who held a small plastic bag in her hand. Inside was a singed notebook, barely held together by melted binding. They found this tucked into the lining of Iris's backpack, she said. Rowan opened it carefully. The first few pages were too burned to read, but the middle section had faint handwriting. Children's drawings. A series of names, some crossed out. At the bottom of one page, in blocky, childlike letters, read, "He said I had to forget, or he'd make me disappear again. Rowan's hands went cold. The pieces were beginning to move, but they weren't forming a picture. Yet, one thing was clear. Iris hadn't just survived. She had been kept hidden, manipulated, controlled. And the man who did it, the one they thought they'd buried in the flames, was still out there, watching. A dense fog rolled in that evening, curling over the streets of Grand Ridge like a memory refusing to fade. Rowan stood outside the precinct's rear entrance, a cigarette burning low between his fingers, a habit he thought he'd kicked years ago. His mind raced with thoughts of the burned notebook, Iris's silent stares, and Kappa's unrelenting watchfulness. Every instinct told him this was just the beginning. He stared into the mist and swore. For a moment, he saw a figure watching from across the street. When he blinked, it was gone. Just fog. Or maybe not. Inside, Evelyn Branscombe was still digging. She had pulled records from an old witness interview, one that had been disregarded at the time due to unreliable mental state. The witness, an elderly neighbor, had claimed she saw a man dragging a little girl out of the fire through a back entrance. Everyone assumed she was confused, but now her testimony read like a confession that had been sitting in plain sight for 6 years. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, brows knit tight. "Gideon didn't die in that fire," she whispered to herself. "He escaped with her." Clara Morrow entered the observation room quietly, where Iris sat alone beside a table, coloring in silence. Kappa rested on the floor beside her, eyes always open, always alert. Clara sat across from the girl, her voice calm and low. "Iris, do you know who the man was that took care of you?" Iris paused, the crayon in her hand hovering just above the page. "He wasn't nice," she said softly. "He told me not to talk about the fire. Or the others." Clara's eyes flicked up. "Others?" The little girl nodded once. "The other kids in the basement." Rowan stormed into the room moments later, heart hammering. "She said there were other kids?" Clara nodded grimly. "We have to find out where he took her after the fire," she said. "Because wherever that place was, it wasn't just for her." Rowan stared at Iris, who now looked up at him, her face solemn. "He had rules," she said, unprompted. "He said I couldn't leave unless someone remembered me." Rowan's mouth went dry. If Copper hadn't reacted, if he hadn't noticed, she would have stayed hidden, forgotten. That night, Silas Renford followed up on a cold lead. A storage unit rented under a false name that had been billed monthly since the fire but never checked. The address was 30 minutes outside of town, off a rural road, hidden behind rows of abandoned silos. When he arrived, flashlight in hand, something felt off. The lock had been removed recently. The unit, silent and dark, held old boxes, blankets, and a row of small shoes lined along one wall. Some looked brand new, others were decades old. Silas backed out slowly, pulling his radio. "Rowan, we've got something, and it's bad." By the time Rowan and Evelyn arrived on scene, it was clear. This wasn't just about Iris. It had never been. Gideon Haverstock had been collecting lives, erasing them from the world. And Iris was the one that got away. But if she remembered enough to speak, then Gideon would know. Rowan looked at the scattered remnants in the unit, then toward the woods beyond. Somewhere out there, a predator still waited in silence, and he might already know they were coming. The silence inside the storage unit was suffocating, as if the walls themselves had absorbed years of unspeakable secrets. Rowan stood near the row of children's shoes, his gloved hand hovering just above a small pink sneaker with a torn sole. Each pair seemed to tell its own story, unfinished, abandoned. Evelyn crouched beside a half-buried crate, sifting through faded Polaroids, crayon drawings, and rusted toys. "These aren't just trophies," she said, her voice tight. "They're breadcrumbs." Rowan nodded slowly, eyes still locked on the shoes. "And Iris is the only one who ever made it out." Back at the precinct, Iris was asleep in the quiet of a holding room converted into a temporary safe space. Maeve Larkspur sat near her, reading through a copy of Iris's medical intake. Nothing made sense. Despite years of assumed captivity, The child was physically healthy, thin, yes, but not malnourished. Her wounds weren't visible, but the trauma lived in her silence, in the way her eyes never stayed on one place too long. Copper laid curled beside her, eyes flicking to every creak in the hallway like a soldier guarding a perimeter. Maeve knew Copper sensed what the rest of them were still piecing together. The danger wasn't over. Silas returned to the precinct with more than just photos. He found a receipt tucked inside one of the boxes, dated only 2 months ago. It was for the purchase of a propane tank, matches, and tarps, all bought under a fake name, but the clerk recognized the description Silas gave. Tall man, gray beard, sunglasses even at night, said he needed the stuff for camping. The clerk told him the pieces lined up too cleanly. Gideon was still nearby, and more importantly, he was planning something. Rowan stared at the receipt, jaw clenched. He's preparing for another fire. Clara and Evelyn worked late into the night matching old records against new data. They began to uncover a chilling pattern. Each time a child had gone missing in the last 10 years within a 100-mile radius of Grand Ridge, a fire had occurred within 48 hours. Always near abandoned properties, always ruled accidental. It had never been tied together before. The records had been scattered across counties, misclassified. But now it was clear. Gideon had been using fire as a cover, erasing scenes, eliminating evidence, and hiding his victims in plain sight. Rowan returned to Iris's room, his face drawn. She was awake now, sitting up, her small fingers curled around Kappa's collar. "He's watching," she said softly. Rowan kneeled beside her. "Who, Iris? Do you remember where he took you?" She looked at the window, voice barely audible. There were trees, a big metal door, and music, old music, from a box. Rowan exchanged a glance with Maeve. That detail, music from a box, sparked something. "A phonograph?" Maeve asked. Iris nodded. "He played it when he got mad." The trap was set, and Rowan could feel it. Gideon wasn't just hiding, he was baiting them. The clues weren't just mistakes. They were invitations. And Iris, brave and broken, was the key to opening doors long sealed by ash and fear. Kappa's ears twitched, head turning toward the hallway. Somewhere out there, the past was waiting to be confronted. And this time, it wouldn't burn quietly. At the crack of dawn, the precinct was already humming. Rowan stood at the evidence board, now covered in maps, red strings, and photos spanning nearly a decade. Iris's memory of the metal door and old music had triggered something in Evelyn. She remembered a file from a condemned property out by Grayson Pines, an estate long abandoned after a fire destroyed part of it in the 80s. Most locals avoided it, calling it cursed. But one thing stood out. The land had never been resold. It was still registered under a shell company tied to Gideon Haverstock's late father. Rowan's jaw tightened. "That's it," he said. "That's where he took her." Silas and Clara prepared the warrant, while Maeve stayed behind with Iris and Copper. The girl had grown more withdrawn again overnight, clutching Kappa's fur like a lifeline. "Don't let him find me," she whispered once, half asleep. Maeve ran her fingers through Iris's curls. "He won't. Not this time." But even as she said it, unease sat heavy in her chest. There was something deeper going on, something Iris hadn't shared yet. Not because she was hiding it, but because her mind had buried it too deep. Trauma, Maeve knew, was a master of disguise. As Rowan, Silas, and Evelyn approached the Grayson Pines property later that morning, the air seemed colder, heavier. The estate rose like a shadow among the trees, ivy strangled, with broken windows and a crooked porch that creaked even without a breeze. But most unsettling of all was the silence. No birds, no insects, just a stillness that warned them they weren't alone. Rowan drew his weapon, signaling the others to move incautiously. "Front entrance is too obvious," he said. "We go around. Look for the metal door Iris mentioned." Behind the house, half buried under collapsed siding and bramble, they found it. A rusted metal hatch sunken into the ground. Evelyn examined the lock, new. Too new. "He's been here recently," she said. Silas nodded. Let's breach it. The moment they opened the hatch, a thick, musty odor hit them. Mildew, gasoline, and something else, something sour. Rowan went first, gun drawn, flashlight cutting through the dark. They descended into a narrow stairwell that led to a basement far larger than expected. Concrete floors, makeshift rooms with metal beds, and walls covered in old children's drawings. In one corner, an old phonograph sat on a table, its crank handle worn smooth. Evelyn stepped closer and noticed it was still functional. She turned it slightly, and it whirred to life, playing a scratchy, haunting tune. "This is what she heard," she said quietly. Rowan, meanwhile, examined the far wall where names had been etched into the cement. First names only, some crossed out, others circled. Near the bottom, Iris, and below it 2 new ones, Maeve and Copper. Rowan's blood ran cold. Gideon wasn't just reliving his past, he was writing the next chapter. And now he had new targets in mind. The question wasn't if he would strike again. It was when, and who else was already too close to the flames. The ride back to the precinct was tense and silent, the kind of silence that wrapped around Rowan's ribs like wire. In the back seat, Evelyn clutched the folder of photographs they'd taken from the underground room. Every image screamed one thing: this wasn't over. Silas, unusually quiet, stared out the window, jaw tight. "He knew we'd come," he muttered finally. "Those names, he's watching us. All of us." Rowan didn't answer. His thoughts were on Iris, on Maeve, and on Copper. Their names hadn't been etched into that wall by accident. It was a warning, a signature, and it meant Gideon was ahead of them again. Back at the precinct, Maeve stood in the observation room with Iris, who had drawn herself into a tight ball on the couch, Copper curled protectively at her feet. Maeve had tried asking questions gently throughout the day, but Iris kept closing off until she mentioned the phonograph. That word unlocked something. Iris sat up slowly and whispered, "He played it when someone was about to disappear." Maeve leaned in, heartbeat quickening. "Did he ever bring other people there?" Iris nodded once. "There was a boy. He didn't listen. He screamed too much." The room felt colder suddenly, and Copper let out a low, rumbling growl. Evelyn burst in moments later, out of breath, holding the forensic report from the storage unit. The results confirmed what Maeve feared. Traces of multiple DNA profiles, none yet identified, were found on the blankets and clothing in the underground room. Some dated back years. Others were fresh. "We may be dealing with a pattern that goes deeper than we thought," Evelyn said. "This man's been taking children for decades, not just years." Rowan took the folder from her, scanning the list of collected samples. How the hell did this slip through so many cracks? While the team worked through the night, Iris had a nightmare. Violent, sudden. Maeve rushed in to find her thrashing and crying, Copper barking sharply. Iris awoke gasping, then said something that made Maeve freeze. "He was in the hallway. I saw him." Maeve tried to calm her. "You mean in the dream?" But Iris shook her head, eyes wide. "No, just now. Outside the window." Panic spread fast. Security footage was pulled, but there was no clear image. Just a faint figure, a silhouette in the shadows, watching from across the street before vanishing into the fog. Harlan Devereaux, the precinct chief, increased security immediately. Officers were posted at every entrance, and Iris was moved to a secure, windowless room. Rowan stood outside her door, hand resting on Coppa's head. "If he's that close," he said, "he's testing us. Waiting." Silas walked up beside him. "Then we make him stop waiting. We set the trap." Rowan nodded slowly. "But this time we let him come to us." As night fell, the precinct lights flickered once. Down the hall, Iris stared at the ceiling, whispering a name that no one had told her. "Silas." When Maeve asked how she knew it, she simply said, "He was in the drawings, and the drawings never lie." The following morning broke with a strange stillness, a kind of uneasy quiet that seemed to press against the precinct walls. Rowan hadn't slept. He spent most of the night reviewing every note, every timeline, every report tied to Gideon Haverstock. Nothing connected cleanly until Evelyn walked in, holding an audio file recovered from an old voicemail backup, dated 5 years ago. It had been misfiled, left buried in the system. The voice on the recording was young, trembling. "Please, if anyone hears this, he's not who he says he is. He hurts people. He makes us pretend." The voice belonged to a boy named Nathaniel, a name Iris hadn't mentioned yet. Maeve played the audio for Iris in a soft, quiet room filled with warm light and quiet sounds to keep her calm. The moment the boy's voice filled the space, Iris stiffened. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "That's Nate," she whispered. "He tried to run. He almost made it." Maeve leaned closer. "Do you know where he went?" Iris shook her head. "Gideon caught him. He said Nate was too loud." Then the music played. Rowan, listening through the glass, swallowed hard. The phonograph wasn't just a soundtrack, it was a sentence. Meanwhile, Evelyn traced the origins of the voicemail. The number had pinged from a cell tower near an old logging road just outside Red Hollow, an isolated stretch with no real reason for traffic. She pulled up satellite images and spotted something strange. A cabin, barely visible under heavy tree cover, just a few miles from the road. It was old, half collapsed, but recent tire tracks in the dirt suggested someone had been there recently. Evelyn turned to Rowan and Silas. "That's our next stop." Rowan, Silas, and a small team headed out by midday, taking Copper with them. The dog had grown increasingly alert, ears constantly twitching, body tense, like he could feel something no one else could. As they neared the cabin, Copper began to growl, low and constant. The place looked forgotten. Warped wood, shattered windows, vines coiled around the roof like hands trying to pull it back into the earth. Rowan approached carefully, gun raised, Silas covering the rear. The door creaked open without resistance. Inside, the smell was worse than before. Decay, mold, and old smoke. In the back room, they found something chilling. A trapdoor, just like the one at the Grayson Pines property. Rowan forced it open, and Copper bolted down the stairs before anyone could stop him. What they found below was different this time, newer, cleaner. And in one corner, wrapped in a blanket, lay a young boy. Alive, thin, terrified, but breathing. "We've got a live one," Silas shouted. Rowan rushed forward, checking the boy's pulse as Copper lay protectively beside him. The boy opened his eyes slowly and whispered, "He knew you were coming. He said you'd finally found her." Rowan froze. Gideon had let them find the boy. This wasn't an escape. It was a message. A move in a game Gideon had been playing for years, and now Rowan was the next piece on the board. The boy's name was Nathaniel, and his rescue sparked a firestorm inside the precinct. Medical teams worked quickly to stabilize him, while Maeve stayed close, whispering reassurances as he fought to stay awake. Iris sat across the room, eyes locked on him, as if seeing a ghost. "He was my best friend," she said softly. "He used to tell me stories when the lights went out." Rowan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes darker than usual. They had one victim back, but Gideon had wanted them to, which meant this wasn't victory, it was bait. Silas paced the main conference room, muttering to himself as he pored over the newest map Evelyn had printed. She'd drawn red lines connecting every known location tied to Gideon's movements. Red Hollow, Grayson Pines, the old farmhouse. The pattern was circular, closing in. "He's pushing us to a center point," Evelyn said, pointing to a single, in the woods, Black Hollow Mill. It was an abandoned textile factory that burned down partially in 1982, the same year Gideon's parents died in what was ruled a suspicious house fire. Rowan stared at the dot. "That's where it started," he murmured. "That's where it ends." Meanwhile, Clara Morrow reviewed a disturbing new development. Several sealed juvenile records were flagged when Iris's identity was confirmed. Among them, records of abuse allegations filed by Gideon himself when he was just 13. No one followed up. No one investigated. The system had failed him then, And now, he was mimicking that failure on children who had no way to fight back. "He's not just a predator," Clara said. "He's recreating his own history, rewriting it with victims instead of himself." The truth was sickening, but it also gave them insight into his next move. As night fell, Iris began to draw again, this time without prompting. She sketched the old mill with remarkable detail. The smokestacks, the broken gate, and in the corner of the page, a cellar door. "That's where he goes when he doesn't want to be found," she said, voice hollow. Rowan gently took the drawing and turned to Silas. "We go in before he disappears again." Silas nodded. "We do it quiet. No sirens. No backup to scare him off." Rowan looked down at Copper, who hadn't left Iris's side. "He comes with us. He's the only one who's always known where to look." By midnight, the team was ready. Rowan, Silas, and Evelyn geared up in silence, tension high. Maeve stayed behind with Iris and Nathaniel, promising Iris that this time, no one would be left behind. The woods surrounding Black Hollow Mill were darker than pitch, the moon veiled behind thick clouds. As they approached the rusted gates, Copper tensed. Then, without warning, he pulled hard to the right, toward a small, overgrown path that led away from the main structure. Rowan followed without hesitation. The trail led them to a camouflaged entrance, half hidden by fallen trees. Copper barked once, low and sharp, before charging inside. Rowan and Silas followed close behind. What they found made them stop cold. A tunnel lined with candles still burning. And just ahead, footsteps echoed. Someone was there, waiting, not fleeing. Gideon wasn't running anymore. He was inviting them in. The narrow tunnel seemed to stretch forever, each footstep swallowed by the flickering candlelight that lined the walls like a procession of ghosts. Rowan's breath came slow and measured, his weapon raised, every nerve in his body wound tight. Copper was just ahead, ears pinned forward, moving like a creature possessed. Behind Rowan, Silas and Evelyn followed, silent and alert. The air grew heavier with every step, thicker, warmer, tinged with the smell of smoke and something older, rot. "He's close," Rowan whispered. "He wants us to find him." They emerged into a cavernous chamber beneath the mill, lit by dozens of lanterns strung across beams and rafters like a twisted celebration. In the center stood Gideon Haverstock, older now, grayer, but unmistakably the same man from the photos that haunted their case files. His face was calm, almost welcoming, as if he were greeting old friends at a reunion. "Took you long enough," he said, voice smooth and steady. Rowan kept his gun trained on him but didn't speak. Gideon stepped forward, hands visible, unarmed. "I didn't bring you here to die," he added. "I brought you here to understand." Silas flanked left, moving toward a locked metal door on the far side of the chamber. "You've taken too many lives to talk your way out of this," he snapped. But Gideon only smiled. "I gave them purpose. I gave them silence. You call it kidnapping. I call it protection." Rowan stepped forward. "Protection from what?" Gideon's eyes darkened. "From the world that forgot me, that ignored the boy screaming in the dark. I made sure no one else had to scream alone." His calm shattered, the mask slipping. "They were mine to keep." Copper let out a growl and moved toward the door just as Silas forced it open. Inside were two more children, frightened but alive. Evelyn rushed to get them out, her voice shaking as she radioed for backup. Rowan took a step closer to Gideon. "It ends tonight," he said, but Gideon simply lowered himself to the ground, hands behind his head. "No, it ended the moment you remembered her," he murmured. "Iris was never supposed to come back." Rowan moved in and cuffed him without another word, but his mind was far from clear. This wasn't justice. It was survival. Back at the precinct, Iris awoke with a jolt. Maeve sat beside her, holding her hand. "They found him," Maeve said gently, "and they found more kids. They're safe." Iris didn't speak. She just nodded and leaned into Maeve's side. Across the hall, Rowan watched Copper lying beside Nathaniel's bed, the dog's eyes finally at ease. After years of searching, he had brought them all home. As dawn broke over Grand Ridge, the mill still smoldered in the distance, its shadow slowly fading into the light. Rowan stood outside the precinct, eyes on the horizon. The case was closed, but the echoes would linger. Some scars don't fade, they teach. And in the quiet hum of the morning, copper barked once, sharp, clear, like the closing note of a story that would never be forgotten.